First of all, I hope everybody had a great conversation in the working groups. I know in working group 1 we did. I think we mostly got through where we wanted to be. We will be reconvening tomorrow in these same groups. So this was not your only opportunity on these topics. I'm in a moment going to ask for a brief report out from each of the working groups. Would welcome any comments from the audience, folks that were part of the conversation as well. When we complete this brief plenary session, the next step is the most important part of the day, and I am going to need your cooperation. We would like to do a group photo. I will reiterate what I'm about to say at the end of this conversation, but just so you're warned, we're going to go out the doors to the left and then to another left. There's a balcony there. The photographer is going to take the shot down at everybody standing there. The sooner we get that done, the sooner that the bar will open and we'll move to the cocktail hour. So thank you in advance for your cooperation. So the purpose of this final session today is just in real time, while the ideas are fresh, to just sort of hear from each of the working groups a few ideas. Is there no magical number? If you have 1, that's great. If you have 4, that's great. We are just looking to get a sense as to what rose to the top of the conversation. So I will get out of the way here and just we'll go down today, group 1 through 4. Tomorrow morning we'll do 4 through 1, just to give you the heads up. So let's start with breakout group 1. And who is Glenn? Is that was us, right? So go ahead.
That's correct. My name is Glenn Pauley. I'm the state director for rural development here in Wyoming. I think I knew less about this topic than anybody in the room, but I'm really happy to be associated with their thoughts because I learned a lot. But the first thing that we talked about is that we thought that there needs to be more focus on basic research. Is that a lot of the infrastructure bill is really focused on deployment, and we really do not have the basic research to meet a lot of the needs that we will need to have as far as to make this transition. And one of the things that we talked about was just with batteries, even with the existing supply of some of these minerals and elements needed for that, they're not going to meet our needs in the future. So basic research really at the molecular level about our alternatives is what is needed. We talked quite a bit about commercialization. That was talked earlier, I know, in the day as far as getting products to the market. There needs to be more of a focus on that. There was the talk about that there was not as much incentives or not proper incentives for a lot of professors to do that. And that there is also different personality types with a lot of the people involved in research and development. With that, we did talk about planning horizons. And as far as the need to invest capital and when a lot of existing venture capital wants returns on those. The last thing that we talked about is really to create an overall system. And we liken that to the Department of Defense, when there's a long-term planning horizon for a lot of these goals that we looked at. There needs to be an overall plan as far as to do the research, the financing, the marketing, and then as far as consumer access and acceptance.
Fantastic, thanks. Working group 2, which is the future of technology, developing and deploying disruptive technologies at scale.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Jody Ruth out of Virginia. And we talked about issue number 1, which was sustaining and properly allocating investments in R&D. And number 4, which was issue number 4, which was the systems that need to change. And the 10 existing disruptive technology lists, Ola, I thought I had it. I've lost it. But it's in our information that we were given. But we added some information to that. We're going to add some other technologies: energy, automation, virtual reality, digital twinning, and supply chain connection, which is impacted by many of the other technologies on there. We first started with where to prioritize, and Deborah said it very succinctly. We need to keep our economic and national security leadership. One of our other group members said it in this way. We really maybe should look at things from an offensive and a defensive standpoint. Starting with the defensive, we can't lose our position in the world in anything, or even our own country status. We've already lost the manufacturing, so there are other things that we can't lose. So we might want to start by focusing on where we need to maintain a defensive posture, and then move to those things that would be more of an offensive posture, perhaps expanding the space frontier as an example. When we start talking about system changes, we had a wide varying group of ideas. One, we need a vision to bring and inspire people. Kennedy's, let's build a rocket ship to go to the moon. Elon Musk, ideas out there about cleaning up space. This would not only give focus, but would also inspire younger people to give them the energy and the desire to work on the project.
Of the people in the room. And I think there was one observation that we needed more industry representation in the room. We talked about sort of a bit of a gulf between higher education, maybe in the liberal arts, and what an industry actually needs. So how do we bridge that gap in bringing people matriculating out of four-year institutions or graduate schools, and actually not just being researchers, but going into industry and being productive where industry needs them. And we talked about ways to bridge, that's what bridging functions exist, and with more thinking down the road on things like co-op assignments, apprenticeships, and different things such like internships. There are advantages and disadvantages with those things from the student perspective. It's great because you get paid when you're an apprentice or an internship or in a co-op. That's sort of a downside for a company is that they have to invest the human capital in training these people. So what are ways to offset that? Maybe government subsidies in the form of grants, helps offset those costs for industry. So that's kind of food for thought for down the road. We talked about the fact that we looked at the issue of telework and how can we leverage telework, which is a fact now. We all lived through COVID. We're not going back to pre-COVID days. So how is telework how can we leverage telework to be a competitive advantage for us? So some discussion there about the very fact that telework actually broadens the human capital pool available to any organization. A shortcoming of that is that we don't have broadband rollout to everybody. So there are underserved communities that don't have access to the technology that they need to be active participants. There's some discussion about, the brain drain, brain gain concept and so maybe one idea would be to have a very deliberate and intentional collaboration using remote work and telework, with the outcome being a benefit for a particular region, the advancement of innovation in a particular region. So we finally wrapped up with the concept of telework that I think is still something a lot of people don't have a clear understanding of what the future will be, but that telework is the decoupling of place and education, and it's the unbundling and rebundling of education, where maybe the future of work and the future of skills acknowledgement and skills-based training, we have badges, certificates, and credentials, and maybe those are the steps that lead someone who is a student, whatever age they are, K through 12, they've already had one career, they're over 40, they're looking at a second career to get upskilled or reskilled, what are the steps? And so that was the beginning of I think what'll be a more robust and in-depth discussion tomorrow.
Terrific, thank you. And breakout 4, the future of place-based innovation.
Great, thank you. I'm Allison Hummel with Idaho National Lab, and we focused on issue 1, establishing regional and national strategies to define, coordinate, and support specialized innovation hubs. We had a really robust conversation. We have about 6 key points. I will try to go through them quickly. I know I'm standing between us and the picture and between us and the bar. So I'm going to actually go to our last point first, because while we came up with it last, it probably should be first, and it's don't put the solution before the diagnosis. Figure out what your regional problem is before you start throwing solutions at it. I think that's really important. Another thing that we talked about quite a lot was know your sweet spot. And for Wyoming as a state, we talked about this as being the agriculture, tourism, energy, and extraction items that we discussed earlier. And we also talked about some really specialized workforce issues, challenges that Wyoming has that need to come into play. But there are also some hyper-local considerations. So for example, on the workforce side, a 5,000 person battery factory may never be a good fit for the state of Wyoming for a whole bunch of interesting reasons, dealing with taxes and other fun things like that. But you may need a Main Street solution in a town where they need one accountant to come and work to support 10 businesses. So there's some really local considerations that need to come into play. Our second point was about communicating, connecting, and convening. A lot of the organizations in the room talked about passing the same customer back and forth multiple times, or having to hunt around to find innovators in communities. So one solution we had was the concept of tech scouting, where you have a person or people who look to build these connections. And one thing that we shouldn't do that was pointed out was this can't be top down when you're looking for these connections. It's going to have to be partially at the grassroots level. It can't just come from the top. A third theme was mitigating risk. One option that was talked about was looking for help when evaluating opportunities. If there is an innovative opportunity or business that we're looking to put funding into, can we get some help making sure that it might be a good bet? And we did note that we were urged earlier that risk is going to be part of this process, and failure is going to be a thing that happens, but how can we mitigate those risks? Another thought was that if we focus on industries or sectors as a whole, rather than on individual businesses, that way we're not picking winners, but we're looking to elevate and improve those sectors as a whole. Rising tide lifts all the boats. Finally, we talked quite a bit about branding. I learned that the state of Wyoming does a lot of amazing stuff, but they're a little humble about shouting it to the rafters, and they need to be a little bit better about that. And they need to think about how they can talk with a statewide voice about what is a Wyoming brand. But again, this also comes back to that hyper-local branding as well. And so making sure there's space for the different local communities to stand out for their different differences. And that is all I have.
Fantastic. Well, let's get, please. Before I let you go, though, I just did want to open it up if anybody from any of the working groups wanted to add a comment or a point that they thought either got left out or they wanted to expand upon. Okay, I can see what time of day it is. So with that, let me thank the 4 of you. Wonderful report outs. And again, these conversations will continue tomorrow.